Hey everyone, this is Kody with Up To Kode, and I'm joined by Mike, my main man.
Hello everyone.
He's the Swiss carpenter bot. Today, this video is how to assemble an ICF wall for beginners. Now, pay attention you guys, because this video is for rookies, for beginners, to teach you the fundamentals and what to keep an eye out for when you're forming your very first ICF wall. So there's a test at the end, and the test is pour day. There better not be any blowouts.
Let's get into it.
So first things first, you can see that first of all, we have to imagine that we have our footings here. So we've chalked out the dimension of our building, and we've done that on a footing. Now you have to use your imagination, but now the footings, when we form, we're very particular on making sure that they're dead on level and dead on straight. Now, because we're in the shop, you're gonna see some waves and humps in the floor, and that just translates and makes a whole lot of extra work when you're setting up ICF. And you'll see that as we go. Also to note, Mike doesn't have a mic, only I do. So you just gotta get close, Mike.
Wanna say something.
Yeah. So if you can't hear him that well, that's just because we're down to one. So having chalked out your building, obviously make sure it's square, all that kind of good stuff. Then the next step is basically just start setting out some corner blocks and figuring out your first row and making sure, okay, like gotta determine where you're gonna start making cuts in the block. And this step's pretty important. Mike kind of iterated to me is whatever you do on your first row is gonna translate all the way to the roof. So if you make some goofy cuts or you rush the first row, you can't change anything. If you have a weird joint somewhere, it's gonna follow you all the way along the building process. So, okay, let's grab some corners, Mike.
All right.
So when these corners arrive on site, they actually are collapsed down like so, and then they'll have an extra web to come alongside. So you just snap this web into here. Oh, come on. See, and this tie is actually no good. We would toss this out. We've been using these for other videos, but if it doesn't snap in and lock, you could have problems because the concrete could hydraulic that back out. So just be careful of that. Okay, so Mike's gonna set that corner up. So outside of the chalk line is outside of our building. Oh yeah, and see, that's how they normally come with the elastic in there, and it's real fun. Hey, Michael?
Yeah.
Okay. And the block is reversible, so that's what's nice about corners. You don't have to order lefts or rights. So yeah, we're just gonna set that up roughly to our lines. I'll grab a full block. So if you come over here, now's the time that you have to determine if the block just naturally works out with the dimension of your building, or if you need to start tweaking the dimensions to make it work. So if you look down here, we've went with the increment of 12 feet, but we're just a little hair short, and that's just the way the block works out. Now you have to ask yourself, what's more important? Making sure that the stacking process is nice and easy, or do you have to be precision, bang on to dimension? Because that's gonna open up a whole other can of worms and difficulties along the way. So we like to just, if we have to, we'll just shrink this building down just a little bit. It's not that big of a deal. Because the only other option you would have, these nubs only work out on a 2-inch increment. So you could cut out a 2-inch piece, scab it in here, and move it over, but now you're gonna be probably about 1.5 inches big on your building, and then you gotta scab this and you have a funny joint here. So obviously this video is for beginners. We're not gonna cover absolutely every element of construction. This is just to give you the fundamentals so that when you arrive on site, you know what's going on and you know the rules for every row as you go along. So Mike had a really good point. is, I would call this a short corner because we're starting with a short side here, then an 8-foot block, and then I would call this a long corner. Now the next row, you're gonna see what happens is we alternate the block so we offset our joints, but we still end up with an 8-foot block in the middle. So you'll see that. So if we were to try to grow this like in 1/2 inch to make the building work perfectly to dimension, it would complicate the process quite a bit. So we're gonna keep it simple. It's not gonna affect our floor system. It's not gonna affect our trusses. So now we're just gonna basically get the block sitting tight, nice and square, figure out our new dimension and chalk a new line. Now, because we haven't made any cuts to our block, we can use these clips. Now, because this is the first row, you have to clip the underside of the tie and the top side. So I'll let Mike do that. And then you got to do the bottom. Okay. Now just keep in mind where these ties are, because Nudura block is collapsible, they can pivot, so these have to go right up to the very outside and in behind these little nubs so that they don't fall out. You can't put those clips anywhere else. Okay, so we have our new fresh chalk line to the true dimension. Now let's figure out the length of this side. How do you do that, Mike? Show us how you straighten those out. Show. Laugh. All right. So I know I can probably start clipping some of these. And then I guess a corner, right?
Yeah.
So again, remember, clip the bottoms and the tops. So now if you notice, short corner here, longer side to the corner over here. So we're chasing our way around. And now, yeah, you can see this long side here. So now we need to determine what this length is. Okay, Mike, how would you do that? Would you measure it, Mike?
Yeah, give her a measure.
So make sure your first corner's on your chalk line. Make sure this corner's on the chalk line. Then we're just gonna get a rough measurement of 42 5/8. Now if you come over here, I have a factory end of my block, and I'm gonna measure over 42 5/8, and I'll show you where that lands up. 42 5/8 is right here. But if I cut on this line, then I can overlap my blocks properly, they'll lock together, but my building would be 5/8 short. So I think for today, we're gonna go 5/8 short on the building and cut on a line. But we'll show you a few other tips to keep in mind upon these cuts. Now because we cut on the line of the block, we can overlap and the blocks will still snap together, but we do have to shorten our building now. Because this is factory and this is factory, Mike can clip this. And while he's doing that, I want to show you something. So right here, this side's factory. So from the edge of a block to the center of your tie is 4 inches, right? Because ties are 8-inch on center. Now because this block we had to do a cut, we're actually 6 inches to this joint. So what you have to do there is you have to mark a big giant X on this, and that stands for you have to scab that. Because if you don't scab this, this will just explode on you. It'll open that wall right up because the block is only designed to be unsupported for 4 inches. So we got to do an X on both sides, and that will be your reminder to always scab those. Now, because this is the bottom in the very first row, this will take the most force of concrete. So that's, you can either go two 1x4s on the first row or one 1x6. But this is definitely the safer route. So we make sure to scab the inside. And then now we have the new dimension to the building, and now we got to chalk this line out. So let's pretend we cut a block perfectly in half, a 4-foot block, but I cut it, basically it'd still be technically 4-inch from snap tie to the end. So in theory, these clips should still work. So again, just don't forget first row, clip 2 on the bottom, 2 on the top. So the clips are used to prevent the walls from spreading apart and blowing apart. And these are designed for anytime your 8-inch center, perfect dimension. Over there where we use the scab is because we're not 8-inch on center, we're a different dimension. So once your first row is fully set, then it's time to install your rebar. We've left it open on purpose just for filming purposes. So Mike had just measured there to the corner. So let's just place it and then we can explain what we're doing here in a sec. So while Mike's measuring and bending another corner just to show you how to overlap the rebar, I want to show you what's going on here. So these ties, we're going to alternate our rebar on different rows. Now the rebar is going to go on the inside of our wall, and we're going to pretend that this is the outside of the building and there's backfill and there's pressure that's wanting to push this wall in. The pressure from outside is going to try to push this wall in. So we need to maintain tension on this side of the wall, and that's why the rebar's closest to the inside. So row number 1, you just pick one. We're going to go on the very inside. And then row 2, we're going to go over here, and we just alternate back and forth. And then the vertical rebar can just slide right down into these, and you'll see that at the end. So Mike measured that. We had roughly a 24-inch overlap or more. You don't technically need 2-foot overlap with 10mm rebar. You just need 40 times the diameter of your rebar. So if it's 10 mil times 40, so you need a 400 mil overlap, which is about 16 inches. We just keep it at 2 feet because it's easy. Remember how I said you had to use your imagination? Well, I don't have any loop wire, but we would tie this connection so that A, it doesn't flop out of position, and B, when we place our vertical rebar later, it's in the proper place. Nothing gets messed up because you can't fix it way down in the wall later on. So now we're ready to do and start installing row 2. A couple things I want to mention. Normally when we're doing a full ICF house, we would actually have all our window heights predetermined. We would think about our floor joist system, our bracing, everything would already been thought of at this stage more or less. But that's a lot of detailed information. So if you guys want, we're going to start the Patreon channel, and we're going to start doing more detailed exclusive content on there. So that's just something for down the road. Like I said, just check the comments down below, and when that's live and ready, you'll see the link for the Patreon, and you'll also see links for other stuff like gear and courses, other things that we have available as well. So now I want to show you one slight difference here. This is an older corner. These had a little more susceptible to blowing out, and you had to scab the bottom 2 or 3 rows on the corners to make sure that this didn't split open. So this second row is actually their new and improved corner block. You can see it's got the curved extra foam in there. So you're going to alternate the corner. Now, this is a trick that we've started using. We always spray foam the corners. So like I said, use your imagination. You can use, this is actually foam adhesive, but you can use the window and door spray foam. So you would just fill these up, right? Spray foam that. Set it down. Now, one thing you got to be careful of is if you're on the job site, make sure that you don't have dirt or debris or snow built up into the nubs, or they won't interlock, or you got to be mindful that they're not broken because your block won't snap down tight. So now Mike, he's eager to get this job done. Show him the rubber mallet trick, Mike. So if you look, the snap ties actually are full height of the block. They're right there, the top of that tie. So that's what's unique about Naduras, it's tie to tie. So you get less shrinkage over time. And if you look right here, they have these teeth that clip together. So these teeth snap together, and those stop the block from wanting to hydraulic and separate this way. But because this is a corner, they're more susceptible to the hydraulic pressure. And actually we found over the years that if you don't spray foam the corners down, this will actually tilt upwards, and it'll cause your wall basically from one side of your building to the other. It could have a bit of a dish in it. So you have to glue these corners to keep them down, stop that hydraulic pressure. So then now that you're on the row number 2, the rule, spray foam the corner and clip these just at the tops now. Because we still have a lot of pressure in this wall and it's still going to want to separate and pull apart. So these clips are important for that. Mike's going to set his corner, so we're going to spray foam that corner. Right, Mike? Mm-hmm. We're going to make sure our blocks are clean. We don't have any nubs that are broken. Nothing's going to get and stop this thing from clicking in properly. So that's spray foamed, clipped so it stops separation. So you can see our factory from our first corner joint is here. And because we've alternated them, just flipped them upside down, now we have that stagger. We don't have to think about how to stagger the system. It does it on its own. So Mike's setting the clips. So now this one will go like this. Just check for broken pieces. Make sure there's no dirt in there. Give me a little spray foam, Mike. Nice. So now this block is the same dimension as the first row, so it's a 42-inch block, and we're going to cut right on this line. I'm going to keep the factory edge closest to the corner. Okay. Don't forget to clip this. Now you have to remember that it's the same cut as the first row. So we're actually bigger. We're 6 inches from the center of the tie to the end. So you have to scab that. You want to keep this stagger as close as possible, and preferably like under a window or something, so that if you had a window here, your drywall layout's going to be a little bit messed up right here, because our snap ties, even though the blocks interlock, our snap ties are goofy layout. So you want to keep this in the smallest amount of area as possible, preferably under a window, so that way when you're drywalling, you don't have an alternate or a change in your layout. So we did this dimension on purpose to show you a multitude of things, the scabbing being over the 4-inch size. In real life, you'd really try to avoid staggering the ties if you could. So that's why when you're designing a building like this is 15'6", you would never have that dimension. So this is just for filming, more just to learn the techniques and the rules for each row. For efficiency's sake, just mark the areas that need to be scabbed. Don't switch gears and do that right away. Just continue on with your block and your rebar for each row, and then you can go back later and just scab everything all at once. Now, if you're a beginner on site, it's everyone's responsibility to keep an eye out for stuff like this. So if you see an X before pour day that hasn't been scabbed, either check to make sure it needs to be scabbed or just do it yourself. Don't assume that a foreman or a journeyman's going to do it. So just make sure everything's labeled nicely. So this is all the stacking that we're going to do on this row. We're going to pretend the second row is fully done, and now we need to do some more rebar. So second row, right, Mike? So what Mike and I did is, because the first row we clipped into the first slot, second row we're going to clip into here, and then third row we're going to come back to the first row, and we just stagger those, and we alternate those, and then like I said, vertical rebar just fits straight down, and then they get kind of locked, so the vertical rebar doesn't sit against this side of the foam and it doesn't get pushed up against here. It stays inside the middle of the wall. So we're going to pretend that this is the start of an overhead door for our garage. So because this is a relatively small block, again, we would probably just spray foam this. Now we got to, yep, see, perfect. See, Mike? And this is why we're filming this, because you cannot forget these little steps. It may seem trivial, but this would just make a hell of a mess if you forgot this step. My little office hands just don't like the work. So now second row's fully finished. Now's the time that we're going to actually set our wall to our chalk line, and we're going to go around with the spray foam gun, and we're going to spray foam the outside of the footing and the inside of the footing, and we're going to set our wall to the chalk line. So Mike was just saying, really good point, is if this was the end of the day, he would spray foam and set these two rows fully to the line. But if we still had a half a day's worth of work, he would set the third row, and then just before the end of the day, you want to lock it down into the footing. So it doesn't have to be the second row, it could be the third row as well. I checked it, it's good. Oh damn. Bloopers. Don't do that. Don't drop things down the wall, they're hard to get out after. So because I have a short section here, we're just going to alternate the corners again. So it's going to go like this. We got to get the spray foam going. Make sure there's no mud or debris or broken nubs. Perfect. And that's factory. So I'm just inspecting for broken foam. Like Mike had kind of mentioned, he might spray foam just this little bit, just because this is part of the corner system. So he might spray foam this. And my cut splice is going to be right here to match the splice from the first row. So Mike has it clipped, and I marked the scabs. First row again, Mike. Rebar first, then form lock. So what the form lock is, Mike's going to grab a piece. Form lock, depending on heights and all that jazz, you could choose to do it in the second. You could choose to do it in the second row. We like to do it in the third row, and it basically just helps keep your wall nice and straight. It locks it in, and that's what we're talking about. So we're good. So you just got to make sure that the form lock, these bars line up with the snap ties. So you would do that form lock all the way around your third row, and that, like I said, it just keeps it straight, keeps it rigid. And that way when you do your shields and your bracing, it doesn't bow from one shield to the next or one brace to the next. It doesn't go wavy on you. So that's what this stuff does. So what would you do, Mike, if you're doing 6 rows, which is a 9-foot wall?
Yep.
Would you do, I guess maybe the very top row, because you'd have, yeah. So you'd have to do, if you're doing a 9-foot wall with 6 rows, likely you'll have windows and stuff, so you'd only be able to do the form lock in the very top, because otherwise you'd be interrupted by windows. So it'd be right up along inside your lintel and your header. So, okay. So we're pretending we're done the job and we're ready to drop all the verticals in. You usually don't do this. You would do this before you install a window buck at the underside of the window, but everywhere else on the job, you just throw these in right before you pour. So this is what we mean by the stagger. You would drop these down the wall and they get locked in there. Because in the next row, there's going to be a rebar here, and it just stops it from teeter-tottering. It stays in place. You don't have to tie anything, and it's easy to do. So that's actually a pretty quick job to take care of. So let's actually show you how to foam down the walls to the footing. So Mike will stay on the inside and I'll go on the outside, and I'll just line it up to the line. So right now I'm good on the corner, so I just let that set. I'll kick it over to Mike. And just everywhere, as long as it's good, you just shove it under. If I need Mike to kick the wall over to me, he can. And you just go along and you just set the whole outside perimeter and lock it in for the day. Don't leave it overnight. This video is just for beginners, just trying to teach you guys the fundamentals so you know what to do and what to expect on the job site. So I think important is always to spray foam the corners, always metal clip every corner, every row closest to the corners. That keeps it from spreading apart. Always mark your scabs, know what to be aware of. We'll scab these later before we pour. And then once our bracing and everything's up, we'll spray foam the inside, the bottom to the footings, secure that. There's a lot of details to take care of. We haven't covered window box. There's a lot of things we haven't covered. We will have a Patreon channel set up for those more exclusive and detailed information, so stay tuned for those and check the comments for those. So that's a wrap for today. I want to thank Mike for joining me and helping me out. He's really just helps me keep all the information in line. So what do you got to say for all the beginners out there, Mike?
Good luck. Hopefully you have no blowouts. You won't have to get any of the Rookie of the Year awards.
Exactly, because the Rookie of the Year, we hand that out every day to all, even ourselves. I get it all the time.
I've
and Mike.
gotten a few myself.
So until next time, thanks guys.